The Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College presents 10 years of best-selling authors and great thinkers.
Good writing and a great love story make for a very special memoir. And that is what Lucinda Franks has written in Timeless, a beautifully rendered literary account of the May-September marriage between Lucinda and her great love, the extraordinary Manhattan District Attorney, Robert Morgenthau. When they met in 1973, Lucinda was a 26-year-old self-styled radical who marched with protesters and chained herself to fences. Morgenthau was a famous 53-year-old lawyer, a symbol of the establishment, who could have helped put her in jail. They shouldn't have fallen in love, but like Charlie Chaplin and Una O'Neill, or Theodore Dreiser and Yvette Eastman, they did, and close to 40 years later, they are living proof that opposites can forge an unbreakable life bond. In Timeless, Lucinda offers an inside look at the unconventional marriage, taking us behind the scenes to reveal untold stories of some of Morgenthau's most famous cases and giving us a window into one of New York's most defiant and iconoclastic couples. Lucinda Franks is also the author of another memoir, My Father's Secret War. And there's even more about her if I can turn this page. A former staff writer for the New York Times. She has written for The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, and The Atlantic. In 1971, she won the Pulitzer Prize for reporting, the youngest woman ever to win it. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure to present Lucinda Franks as the Writing Center's first speaker in the 2016 best-selling author series. Lucinda?
Thank you, Louis. That was such an elegant description that I really want to go read that book if I hadn't written it. Thank you all for coming out tonight in this horrible weather. It shows real dedication to books, and I'm very appreciative. And I'm appreciative to Louis and Alana for gathering you up and getting you here. So I'm going to begin at the beginning. And this is somewhat near the beginning of the book. It's not going to be too long. And then we'll talk. We'll have Q&A. The last thing I wanted to do was marry my husband. Bob Morgenthau was a widower almost 3 decades older, came with 5 children, a cat, 2 dogs, and resided in a suburban house. It looked like this. On the lowboy in the hall was a mound of unopened mail that a casual breeze could have sent cascading to the floor. The chintz sofa with its fat golden flowers had gone vapid. The illusion of a spring bounty passed to winter gorse. Little crystal bowls were filled with shriveled nuts. Not only that, this man, the stereotype of the bourgeoisie, he's walking right down the aisle now, had the power to put me in jail. And this was supposed to be the man of my dreams? I had barely escaped incarceration anyway, emptying balloons of blood on draft files in various cities, trespassing on government property, chaining myself to the wrought iron White House fence. It was the 1970s, and I felt a gnawing shame whenever I thought of Vietnam, which was much of the time. An ethos of death permeated my generation. That long after we were losing the war, we were still dropping almost 3 million tons of bombs on Cambodia made me crazy. That we had killed student protesters for no reason made me especially crazy. If you were intelligent and young, you were trying to figure out how to be sane in an insane world. It never occurred to me that a member of the establishment, a man born into the same culture as the deluded architects of the Vietnam War, would be the answer. Bob Morgenthau came from one of New York's most distinguished German Jewish families who were steeped in statesmanlike politics. I was steeped in Gentile society. Raised in a Boston suburb where the men wore yellow pants and red jackets and the lawns were trimmed as short as their hair. I let it all hang out while Bob calmly kept it in. He was cautious, steady, a sloop balanced at dead center. I was a catamaran racing breakneck through every channel I encountered. While he was aggressively enforcing the law, I had become dedicated to breaking it. The very notion that we should come together was an oxymoron. A few months later, I can't get enough of him. I switch from channel to channel, trying to understand his baffling persona. The man I know has the sweet cadence of an oboe, and the man I don't, the prosecutor, speaks with an Old Testament fury. Out in the world, you leave a heavy footprint, Bob, but here at home you come so softly. Through our door, I can barely hear you. You greet me with that little smile, crescent moon against a sky of gold, then cast your eyes down and look up shyly, like a bird that cannot be caught. I, however, have walked happily into my cage. Recognized from my journalism, I could fly anywhere I wished, but you are a public icon, and my mission is clear. Take care of him, your cousins and friends said grumpily. He is a national treasure. But we were so alike in dash and spirit, no stereotype could fit us. We were giddy with the concept of agelessness. Words by the million have been printed about you, but none have revealed your real life, your secret life, that you belong to me. Last night, the city of New York owned you, but now as the sun rises, you are mine. Light falls upon your exquisite forehead, your extravagant nose. I gently place my fingers on your lids and feel the rapid flutter of your eyes, the wings of a hummingbird. Such are the things that make love ache. Only when I take your craggy hand, mine so soft and round against it, when I run my fingers over the sharpness of your bones, do I remember you're twice as old as I am, twice as worldly. At times, when we make love, I felt your heart pounding so fast, it seems as if it will burst through your chest. Terrible things happen to older men in this situation. 2 ancient popes expired in flagrante delicto. So did Nelson Rockefeller. And so, incredibly, did Attila the Hun. I often listened for your breathing. Once when I woke up, I couldn't hear a thing. Your chest was still, no heartbeat at all. I began thumping on your sternum. Breathe, breathe, I pleaded. You jumped up gasping. You thought I was crazy. But I intend to keep you alive. I will feed you what you love, white peaches dripping with juice, lobsters so fresh they snap up their tails. I will keep you moving and thinking and even teach you to shout and to curse. Everything you do will be of importance to me. I will make love stop time. I first met Robert Morgenthau on a stormy day in 1972 with my hair in strings and my white knit poncho dripping all over his office. I had been assigned by United Press International to interview New York's mafia-busting U.S. attorney who had just been fired by Nixon while in the midst of investigating the president's crooked cronies. I asked so many questions that Morgenthau thought I was either the smartest reporter he'd ever met or the dumbest. When the interview was published, he decided I wasn't the dumbest, and he couldn't get what he called the rug I had been wearing out of his head. He wanted to ask me out, though he had compunctions about preying on me, especially an innocent lamb who was a revolutionary hippie. But he pursued me anyway. He got elected DA of New York. He invented the prosecution of white-collar crime as we know it today. He put leaders of industry in jail, and still he pursued me. The problem was that I was harboring a draft resistor, and Roger the Dodger never did tell me when Bob had called. So Bob recommended me for a job on the New York Times, where I would have to answer my own phone. Morgenthau was strictly a news source, however. I never had a clue we'd be anything else. After all, I was in my 20s, and he was an old man of 54. Besides, I too was rising in my career, doing stories like Red Dye No. 2, which permeated our food supply. I found 2 lab assistants who showed me printouts of how the dye caused cancer in rats, and there was a public outcry, and the FDA banned the dye. Bob would usually call me with story tips, but one day he got up his nerve and called me for a date, or at least he considered it a date. I thought he just wanted to sell me a story. He said, "We are going to Arthur Schlesinger's home." So I dressed up in my best silk peasant blouse, my bell-bottoms, my platform shoes. We walked into the Schlesinger home, and there was a ghastly fairyland of chiffon and silk and satin and feather boas coiled around swan-thin necks. The glitterati looked at me as though I was homeless. I turned around to beat a retreat and bumped right into Jackie Kennedy Onassis. Now, Mrs. Onassis had not been seen for a while, so the society ladies dropped their jaws and just smiled dumbly at her. I looked up at Bob, and he was smiling too, but not at Jackie, at me. 18 months later, we were engaged. Our friends went into shock. It was as though the Pope had asked Squeaky Fromme for her hand in marriage. Professional women and men some 30 years apart just didn't marry in the 70s. His cousins urged him to see a psychiatrist. So faced with this opposition, we of course got married. In spite of our differences, below the surface we were like twins. We had the same moral code, we found the same things funny or pretentious, and we were both hopeless idealists. We helped each other with our careers. I helped Bob figure out some of his cases, and once we actually role-played a criminal case called the Bernie Goetz case. I played the role of Bernie Goetz, the subway vigilante who had shot 4 unarmed African-American boys whom he thought would be robbing him. And Bob played one of the African-American boys. Then we switched roles, and we switched roles again, and we did it again. And by the end of this exercise, it had become clear to Bob that he had to indict Goetz. Then there was my exclusive interview with Hillary Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky affair. I was enthusiastically lauded for it, and then predictably the media turned against me, accusing Hillary and me of making excuses for Bill. I began to obsessively check out every derogatory blog all day, every day until finally Bob stole my computer. He gave it back only when the blogs stopped criticizing me. How was it to write a book about your husband? Well, first of all, a reporter doesn't usually live with his subject. How could I be honest, do Bob justice? How could I risk revealing his foibles and weaknesses? How far should I go? After all, I had a certain interest in keeping my marriage intact. On the other hand, I didn't want to write a love letter, but an authentic portrait of him. The public didn't really know Bob. Most people only saw him issuing indictments and thought him an austere, unapproachable man. I wanted to show him in all his complexity, his kindness, his generosity to the little people, his wicked and antic sense of humor. He was happy for me to be his memoirist. That way he didn't have to look back, which he hated to do, nor did he have to do the work. But I still felt a little guilty. I knew his laissez-faire, take-it-on-the-chin attitude. Write whatever you want, he had said, but I wasn't going to let him off so easily. I insisted he read my journals chronicling our relationship and every draft of the manuscript. There were about 20. Even then, to find out what he really thought was almost as hard as writing the book. I had to look for clues. How do you like that passage, sweetheart? I'd ask. And if he said, it's your memory, I would know I was in trouble. Then it was necessary to put the manuscript before him, to find the paragraph he didn't like, and to watch for the slightest twitch in his facial muscle or the double sniff to discover exactly what he didn't like. Timeless is an intimate love story, but it's also a history of the last half century in New York, and a book that takes the reader behind the scenes into the inside stories of Bob's juiciest cases, like the Central Park jogger. In his many years as prosecutor, first as U.S. attorney and then as district attorney, Bob stretched his rubber arm way beyond his jurisdiction. As a local DA, he went places the feds didn't dare to go. He busted international bank presidents and terrorist cells. The Times dubbed him DA of the world. Just before he retired at age 90, not really retired because he's still working as a pro bono lawyer for Wachtell Lipton, but just before he retired as DA, he caught Lloyd's of London and Credit Suisse not only violating international sanctions against Iran, but laundering billions of dollars for Iran that funded its suspected nuclear bomb and other weapons of mass destruction. These included ballistic missiles with which they could threaten Israel and other neighbors. Ironically, Iran took those billions and billions that they got from Lloyd's and Credit Suisse and bought its nuclear materiel from none other than America. It's not well known, but Bob has built a network of international spies from MI5, the Mossad, and other foreign agencies. In 1992, he alerted U.S. intelligence that something big was coming down, a terrorist attack not like anything before. Bob's office had obtained some 100 boxes of material belonging to members of Al-Qaeda. It included blueprints and pictures of the World Trade Center, CIA manuals on the use of large weapons, crude sketches of airplanes going into big buildings, and vitriolic audio tapes urging the destruction of America. The CIA, the NIA, the FBI ignored his warnings. The FBI didn't even have the materials in the boxes translated. Then, some months later, in February 1993, the World Trade Center was bombed for the first time. 6 people were killed and many injured. This was apparently only a trial run for some of the same terrorists who planned the 1993 bombing. Their relatives, their sons, their cousins, their uncles, and, inadvertently, America's intelligence agencies were responsible for 9/11. We can talk more about that in Q&A. In gatherings like this, some people look like they want to ask me a certain question, yet they don't dare do it. But Bob and I recently and happily celebrated our 37th anniversary. And before you cannot ask the question, I might as well answer it. Did I marry my father? In response, I'd like to read you one short passage from Timeless. I believe that love is no accident, no whisper from a random universe. It comes from deeper channels of longing and recognition, a collection of tiny lights that gathered force long ago. The boy with long fingers sweeping the keys of a piano, an uncle's laugh, a teacher who always listened, and the one who precedes them all, the Father. The things about him you never forget, his hands circling your waist, flying perilously in the air, sun-blinded, grains of sand rubbing against your cheek, your chubby hands smoothing back the soft bristles of his hair so they spring up again like soldiers. Then in a flash, you stand head to head, face to face, and he walks away, for you have become too mature, too near, a danger. Was it something you did? An ineffable longing takes over, and then eventually is forgotten. The years go by, and one day you meet him again. The thistly chin, the bright smile, and behind his glasses, the love that was always there. He's not your father, but he is everything you wanted him to be. Thank you. So, questions answered? Questions? Somebody has to be the first brave soul. In other words, we're going to be sitting here for a while. Yes?
Do you think that we'll see a Robert Morgenthau again?
Well, I won't. I think I really have to say, modestly, that my husband is an extraordinary human being. And they don't make very many of them anymore. I'm sorry, I should elaborate on that. Maybe you could.
No, I want you to answer the question.
How could you rephrase it?
Here is this man that's legendary, that despite what Nixon did, went on to higher things, okay? Will we see somebody like this again?
Well, I think we first have to see some decent people running for politics. I mean, the internet and the media exposure and the indictments of politicians has taken the shine off of it. I mean, you have some wonderful ones like Chuck Schumer, our senators, Hillary Clinton, I can name, at least a dozen. But I think that the time that nurtured Bob was a time in which principles and honesty and ethics were the most important things. I remember Bob telling me a long time ago that his first boss, Judge Robert Patterson, who was Secretary of War and then started his own law firm, he hired Bob right out of school, and he had Bob go around everywhere with him. One time, he met with a man who said, "I'll pay you an enormous amount of money. I want you to represent my son. He's accused of not paying his taxes, but I think he can beat it." So Robert Patterson said, "Thank you very much, I'll think about it." Afterwards, he told Bob, "We're not going anywhere near that case. I think people should pay their taxes." So he wouldn't represent anybody that he didn't believe was innocent. And I don't think you have a lot of lawyers like that anymore.
Young Paul.
I think you're extraordinary.
Thank you.
I enjoyed the book tremendously. Oh, I'm sorry. I think you're wonderful. I enjoyed the book tremendously. And I think a lot of what we saw that your husband has done is due to you. I said to myself, she works at this marriage. I was married for 18 years and my husband died early. And what I thought after he died was I didn't know what I had. And I still go through that. And while I'm reading your book, you knew what you had and you worked at it and you had it grow. And what I got from reading this is that you are as responsible for your marriage and your husband and your family as anybody.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. By the way, I sometimes don't realize what I had or I have. You know, nobody's perfect. So I'm sure you were just as good.
You had said that initially you were very different on the surface, but that when you really got to know each other, you were like twins. And I just wondered what things that you shared that made you like twins.
Well, we had an exquisite sensitivity to the Holocaust. My father had been a spy during World War II, had liberated the first Holocaust camp found by the Allies, never got over it, and never talked about it at all. But I think from symbiosis, I got, osmosis, excuse me, I got a sense of the gravity of what happened to the Jewish people. Bob's father who was Secretary of the Treasury, tried to save as many Jews as he could in Roosevelt's administration. So we went to Israel many times. We met with Arik Sharon. I know he's controversial, but he was a good person, and he showed us up to the West Bank and showed us where the cities and Tel Aviv airport was and could be rocketed by Arab, militants. He took us to his farm where Arabs were working happily, and he took very good care of him. I was 8 months pregnant at the time, and he and I were bumping bellies now and then. We just shared the same outlook on life, the same morals, the same loathing of pretentiousness or corruption. Not that I was so perfect, he was perfect, but I certainly wasn't, although I don't think I was corrupt. But anyways, you know. Yeah, Bob has a very, very dry sense of humor. I correct me, Bob, if I tell this wrong, but one day in his office, in the DA's office, a computer expert came in to explain the new computers to all the bureau chiefs and the leaders in the DA's office. He talked in computer language. He talked incoherently to any of the staff members that were there. And he left, and there was silence. And Bob said, "Well, what I want to know is it good for the Jews?" There was another long silence, and then one person began to laugh, and then everybody laughed. So that's how dry his sense of humor is.
Yes.
This thing about 9/11 is so shocking. Why do you think they didn't read the boxes and they weren't prepared and they never admitted that I'm hearing this for the first time. And did I understand that you thought that the CIA and FBI was complicit in that it happened?
That's exactly right. You have to say inadvertently, because this is what happens. I don't want to give too much away for people that are going to read the book, but from a lot of research that I did after 9/11 and from Bob's own knowledge, a picture emerged of the embryonic members of Al-Qaeda fighting in the war in Afghanistan against the Russians, you know, on the side of the Americans. As a reward, they were brought back to the United States with sometimes $1 million in their pockets of CIA money. CIA had paid them to fight. And they were scattered all over, you know, resettled all over the United States. But they managed to come together slowly, and, you know, a cell was formed here and there. The CIA certainly got word of this and paid many of them to be informers. And then they paid more of them to be informers. And pretty soon, there were as many Al-Qaeda informers as there were terrorists. The only thing was that many of the informers were double agents. They would say the World Trade Center is going to be bombed on October 31st, 2002. And it was actually bombed on September 11th. So that's what would happen. So inadvertently, the CIA built up Al-Qaeda with money it gave to informers, with money it gave to them before they came to the United States, and then didn't know what to do because they were getting bad information. And the FBI, I think, under the instruction of the CIA, didn't want to prosecute, this is a little complicated, but I'll let you find out from the book, a prominent person, because that would have blown the cover of a lot of the informers. So that's why they didn't that's why they didn't let Bob have the boxes to put in evidence for a certain case.
We'll take two more questions, if there are. Who would like any more questions? The young lady there.
Anybody who's brave enough to get up and talk to us deserves our full attention. And so,
Thank you, and I know I had yours.
So I better think quick. Was there ever? This is not on, so why am I using it? Anyway, my name is Julia Doe, Midland, Michigan. Is that better? Yes. Okay. So, as a reporter, living with someone in a world that you were perhaps covering, I don't know, maybe you had gone in different directions career-wise at that time. How does one protect against, I don't want to say bias exactly, but sort of information and the flow of life versus the stand back and talk about it with a certain objectivity, but yet personal loyalty.
That's a great question. We had a firm agreement that we would not, that I would not cover. I couldn't cover anything that Bob was involved with. No case, no controversy, nothing. I didn't even touch the law. That wasn't in my, field, element, yes. And he didn't mess with my stories. So in that sense, we were very clearly bounded. But, I advised him on cases. He helped me with my interviews and my stories. So there was a little bleeding going back and forth, but we tried to at least stay ethical about it.
Last question, I believe there
I
was.
was just gonna tell you a story. I took some video footage of the Civic Center downtown, just to give you an example of the office that Bob ran. I went and I shot the State Supreme Court. I went and I shot the Surrogates Court. I went and I shot City Hall. I went and I shot the municipal building. When I got to the DA's office and started shooting, a cop came running out at me and said, "Where are you doing? What are you doing? In your year of 9/11? I'm saying, that's the only one out of all the buildings.
Was there a question?
Wow.
No, I said I have a little story.
Oh, I see. We'll take one more question, final question.
Do you both still now discuss what's going on in the world with the problems that we have now? And if you do, which I suspect you do you think it started back then when you were very involved with all these investigations and all? Where do you pinpoint sort of the problems that have evolved today?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Where do I pinpoint?
In other words, the problems going on in the Middle East and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you sort of focus in on a certain thing that happened, or pinpoint something that led to this? Where the fault lies, in other words, or what do you feel about what's going on today?
Well, each place is different, each area is different, but I think the Middle East, that's been going on forever. That's been going on even before Israel was declared a nation. That's been going on for thousands of years. Well, not thousands, but... and I covered Northern Ireland, and that was something that had been... And Bob urged me to go to Northern Ireland and found a story in a newspaper that I followed up. That war had been going on for 800 years. So I just think it's, and sometimes there was a period during the Afghanistan and Iraq wars when you would read the newspaper, read the Times, for instance, and it seemed like recycled stories every day. It just rolled over. Everything continued and rolled over and rolled over. And I think that, that's the best answer I could give.
Lucinda, thank you for a wonderful,
Thank you.
talk.
Thanks.
Please join us. Lucinda is going to be sitting at this table right in